Hey, everybody, and welcome to Cognitive Psychology. I am your host, Alex, or you can call me Dr. Daniel. Whatever you are comfortable with is comfortable with me. So, thank you so much for being here. I wanted this video to essentially be like a welcome to the class video that kind of walks through what the course is about, what kind of assignments you're going to have, and maybe what you can expect from me as your instructor and professor in this class. So, let's get right into it. Let's talk about what this course is. What is cognitive psychology? Now, if we were face to face, in a classroom, I would ask this, and people would. I was going to make a snarky joke about how people would generally just sit there in complete silence, but usually, whenever I ask this in the classroom, I do get a couple of takers. I do get a couple of volunteers who will raise their hand and say, "Cognitive psychology is the study of the brain." And then I will usually say something to be a little bit of a smart aleck, where I will, because that's my middle name, Smart Alexander. Sorry, that's a really stupid joke. And it's way too early in this class to be hitting you with these stupid jokes. But usually what I would retort is, well, how is the study of the brain different from any of your other psychology classes? Because when it comes down to it, that is what all of your psychology classes are, right? Is how does the brain work? And you have different levels of analysis, right? If you're taking Dr. Manella's behavioral neuroscience class, you're going to be talking about neurotransmitters. If you're taking Dr. Bressler's adaptation and animal behavior class, you might be talking about generations of species, not even looking at a single brain cell, but looking at entire lineages, right? So it's a very broad question to say it's the study of the brain. So, what is cognitive psychology? And then I'll usually have somebody else raise their hand, and then they'll say, well, it is the science of thought. And then I'll say, well, okay, well, what is thought? And you can see how this can get really annoying if I were to do this in person, going back and forth like that. So instead of trying to define it that way in a really vague, abstract way, I wanted to just kind of walk through some of the things that we're going to be covering in this course. So for example, we're going to be answering questions like, does human memory have a storage limit? We're going to be talking about that in Chapter 7, one of the 3 chapters that we have on memory. Memory is a big part of cognitive psychology, so we're going to be spending a lot of time with that this semester. Should classes only be 15 minutes long? We're going to be talking a lot about attention this semester. Attention is actually something that is on my mind a lot these days because of technology and social media, and kind of how a lot of these algorithms and technologies try to kind of capture your attention. We'll talk about whether or not pigeons can identify good art versus bad art, if they can classify Monet, the painter, versus Picasso, the painter. So we'll be talking about that in Chapter 4, which is about object recognition, but more in Chapter 9, which is about concept formation. We're going to be asking, why do people generally misunderstand statistics? Whenever you take statistics, because most of you have to as part of your major requirement as a psychology major, it's a tough class. It doesn't come easily. It doesn't come naturally. Why is that? Why doesn't it come naturally? Why are people so bad at making predictions? Why are people susceptible to gambling? We'll talk about that in Chapter 11, which is on judgment and decision making. And then we'll also be looking at psycholinguistics to answer questions like, for bilingual speakers, what language do those individuals think in? Not to spoil it, but I find this really fascinating that I asked one of my professors in grad school this, because he was from the Basque region of Spain. If you're not familiar with that, it's kind of a region between Spain and France, and so they have their own dialect there, not dissimilar to Creole, which is a mixture of lots of different languages, but primarily French and English. So I asked him, well, what language do you think in? You're fluent in English, you're fluent in Spanish, you're fluent in French, and you were born speaking, this Basque dialect. And he laughed and thought about it and said, well, it really depends on what it is I'm thinking about. If I'm thinking about work, I'm thinking in English. if I am thinking about family, I'm thinking in Spanish. Really interesting. We'll talk more about that in those chapters. So let's get into it. And so hopefully those questions maybe got you a little bit interested in some of the things we're going to be talking about this semester. So our textbook this semester, I'm happy to say, is totally free because I wrote it myself. And I know that that sounds extremely egotistical. I know it sounds extremely vain and narcissistic, because whenever I was in college and a professor had their own textbook, I would roll my eyes, because usually the expectation was that I would need to buy that textbook, which was like, oh, of course this professor wants me to wants me to give him my money. But that is not the case here. I wrote this textbook in large part because I couldn't find any free alternatives that were satisfying to me. And so I made this textbook that we're going to be using this semester. I am a little bit stressed out about it because this is the very first time I've used this in a classroom setting. I spent a full year basically kind of like working on this 13 chapter textbook. Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I'm actually really happy with it. I think it is the reason why I like it is because I couldn't find any free textbooks online that were approachable but also scholarly. And what I mean by that is that, like, actually cared about the details about research and walked through, well, how do we know about this knowledge? So I didn't want it to feel like just like a Wikipedia article, which is kind of what some of the free textbooks out there feel like. So I just decided to write one myself. It's meant to be no frills right now. That's why, it's totally free, is because I wanted it to be publicly available. And for that reason, I did not have a team of people helping me with it. I didn't have folks to go out and find a bunch of images that I can include here. And I didn't take a lot of time to find those images to include there. So it is very text heavy, but it is generally shorter than what you would get with a lot of other textbooks, because again, I did not want there to be a whole lot of frills. I did not want it to be bogged down in jargon either. I didn't want it to be overly technical. I wanted this actually to be a book that you as a first year psychology major could pick up and kind of roll with, or if you are a high school student and you're interested in going into college, that this would be a textbook that is approachable and accessible and not super daunting. So I'm really curious to know what your experience is like with it as we move through the semester, and any kind of feedback you have would be greatly appreciated while I work on it. And I am going to be tweaking it as the semester goes, so I'm going to be kind of releasing it kind of chapter by chapter essentially, instead of one full thing. So you'll find that online. You can download it, or you can just open it up and browse it online. Either way is totally fine. I am going to have other reading recommendations that come along in these lecture videos because I love to read, and I love to read about cognitive psychology, and so I have a couple of recommendations for, like, hey, if you're interested in this, check this book out. And so, for example, in the past, whenever I would have a textbook, which would usually run about $200. The one I usually recommend for this class, that are required for this class, it eventually was like $180, and I was like, I can't make students pay for this. This is too expensive, and the economy sucks. So, and the economy always sucks whenever you are an undergraduate student who is trying to pay your way through school. So at that point, I was like, all right, I can't, in good conscience, make students, require students to pay for something that expensive. So there are other books that I will be like, hey, check this out. For example, I got on this this thought thread because I was thinking about, I would have this textbook that I required, and then I had another book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which you can find right over here on the side. And I love this book so much. Do I have it behind me? I don't have it behind me. I have another one of Daniel Kahneman's books, but it's a really easy read, and it was written by one of the most influential researchers in all of cognitive psychology. And I don't think it would be unfair to say he's one of the most influential researchers in all of psychology. He won the Nobel Prize for his work on behavioral economics and prospect theory. So really, really cool stuff. And it's actually a book that I think anybody with a high school degree could kind of pick up and read and understand and get a lot out of. But students rebelled and were like, this is way too much reading. So that's why I am going to say this is an optional thing. You can check this out if you are interested. But recommendations like that I'll be making as we move. So I want to tell you a little bit about my teaching philosophy and outlook. So my perspective on all of this are, I come from kind of a research-heavy background. My degree is in cognitive and behavioral sciences, which before it was titled that, was titled experimental psychology. And so I also teach a lot of the research-heavy classes here on campus, Research Methods 1 and 2, and stats. Those are the primary ones, and then when I'm not doing those, they have me teaching this, which is my specialty, and also sensation and perception. And my other passion project is history and systems in psychology, which is sometimes offered as a capstone course. But those are the classes that I teach, and so that's kind of the approach that I have for a lot of this stuff, is I think of it in terms of like research. I think about in like, well, this is interesting, but how do we know? How do we know that this is true? And so you'll get a lot of that as we move through this semester of looking at how do we know about this stuff? So looking at the kind of research background that underlies all of our knowledge here. Cognitive psych is my specialty, as I mentioned, particularly memory, attention, and perception. And my dissertation, for example, was about taste memory, so how we remember tastes. And before that, my thesis was about non-human abstract concept learning. And so I'm really interested in how the mind works and how memory, attention collide in order to help us kind of evaluate the world around us. I am generally receptive to feedback, and I have a thick skin, so if there's something about this course or this textbook that is not working for you, just let me know, and I'd be happy to kind of improve as we go along here. The way that I see our class is not combative. In other words, I don't see this as a adversarial relationship that you and I have. I think of me as myself as essentially being like your coach or a cheerleader, where I can't go out on the field, but I'm going to cheer you on, or if I'm your coach, that I am going to give you everything in my playbook that I can, quite literally, because I'm giving you a textbook, but I'm giving you everything in my playbook to help you succeed and to help you plan and prepare so that we can conquer this material together. And so I can't run out on the field for you, but I can, cheer you on and make recommendations of like, hey, maybe this time you can try studying in this way, so that you can ace the exam. I always tell every class that my career goal is, without dumbing down any content or assignments, I would love for every student to make an A in the class. So I'm not somebody who is trying to take points away from you, but I would love for everyone to master this stuff, and so that whenever I turn my grades in at the end of the semester, that the registrar calls me and they're like, hey, Professor Daniel, I think there's a problem with your transcripts here, and I can say, no, all those A's are deserved. Other things in terms of office hours and stuff like that, I know that because it's an online class, it's kind of a weird thing to think about, but I'm always going to be available from 11 o'clock until noon. So if you want to schedule like a Zoom appointment with me, I'm happy to meet with you during those times. If you want to come on campus and meet in my office, we can arrange that too. Just let me know. And I know those times don't work for everybody, because a lot of you might have full-time jobs where you are working during that time. And so if that time doesn't work, just let me know, just email me, and we can figure something out. We can figure out a time that works for both of us. I'm best reached through email though. So if you email me, that's the best thing for me to get back to you with. All right, let's talk about the assignments. We have a couple of different ways in which you're evaluated this semester. So we have exams, we have some activities that are kind of mixed modes. We have online discussions, of course, and then we have some research quizzes. And I'll walk through what each of those are, and I will specify that everything that we do is going to be due Fridays at 5 p.m., not Sundays, not over the weekend, but on Fridays. So just keep that in mind while you prepare your week's work for this. The reason why I have it at Friday at 5 p.m., I'll go ahead and tell you now so that, I don't have to mention it later. There was actually some research that was done looking at a comparison of course due dates across a semester. And what they found is that classes that had the due dates consistent always had the best course outcomes. But the classes that had consistent times at Friday at 5 p.m. had been better mental health and academic outcomes than classes where it was consistently due at Sunday before the end of the day. And that is usually when I used to have all of my assignments due as Sunday at the end of the day, but it seems like that is actually more stressful and promotes insomnia in a way that Fridays at 5 p.m. don't. So I know that those of you that work Friday at 5 p.m. is not a great time of the week necessarily, which is why sometimes, it might be better to knock out that course stuff over the weekend a little bit early so that way you don't have to worry about it later in the week trying to juggle that during the weekday. So just that's something to keep in mind. I will always keep you updated with course announcements letting you know when things are due, so that way it's always on your radar. So the exams, we have 5 of them. They are equally weighted, 10% each. They are a mixture of multiple choice and short answer. You'll have about an hour and a half to complete those. They're open notes. So it's going to cover stuff from our textbook, from our lecture videos, from the readings that we do, with the online discussions. Basically, everything is fair game for our exams here. The final exam is going to be cumulative. So just keep that in mind while you're studying, that don't throw away your notes, because they may be helpful notes for you to study with on the final exam. We have reflection and application activities that'll be 20% of your grade, and these are basically going to have you take things that we learned in class and apply them to the real world. So an example of this would be in chapter 1, I have you try to imagine what a good metaphor for the mind might be, and to draw it out. And so maybe you're thinking about thinking about how the mind works. I think about it like a city, and in that city I have a bunch of interstates that go from the important areas, and I have a school. That's where the learning happens. And then I have a library. That's where the memory occurs, that kind of thing. So, for that assignment, there's a written piece where you're going to explain this metaphor, but there's also a visual piece. So you'll draw it out, and you can take a picture of it, you can scan it, or you can design it online. You can, design it in Google Slides or in Microsoft PowerPoint, and then, put some shapes together, and then, attach that. But I wanted it to be something that was kind of, that got you thinking in new and different ways, and it's not going to feel totally boring like every other assignment. So sometimes they may be voice recorded, where you can upload a voice memo, or you can have the opportunity to record a video of yourself talking about something. You don't have to have your face, present, but I wanted to give you a bunch of different opportunities for ways that you can submit assignments for this class. But they will all be kind of having you to think about this stuff in the real world, or thinking about how it, makes connections with the other things you might have learned in your psychology classes. There is a rubric that is going to be posted online. You can find that on Play-Doh. The online discussions, these are going to be open-ended. A lot of them are going to be based off of some cognitive tests that you can do, and then to reflect on your performance in those cognitive tests. So it's another chance for us to be hands-on, applying this stuff that we learned in the class. to see how it is in action. And again, this is due Fridays at 5 p.m. And for full credit, you'll make a post, but then you'll also make a response or reply to one of your classmates. I do have a rubric for this also on Plato, but basically, in order to get full credit, you just do a good job. You know what that means for a discussion. It just means think about it, think critically about it, do your best to answer it, treat it seriously, don't half-ass it. And then when you're making a reply to, don't do just the bare minimum. And when you're replying to a classmate, don't just say like, haha, yeah, never really thought about it that way. Actually think about it. Maybe ask them a question that, kind of has them thinking about things differently. And then if you don't, and if you just if you just do a post, you'll still get some credit for that, but not full credit. All right, and then we have research quizzes. This is the final piece here. So we have these 5 research articles that we're going to read together throughout the semester, and you'll have a quiz about each of them. They're relatively short, so only about 10 to 12 questions. Half of those are going to be multiple choice. And the reason why I assign these is because I think it's really good practice for not just reading research articles, but for reading technical, dense text and learning how to extract meaningful information from those texts. This will help promote scientific literacy for these kinds of articles, which you're going to be experiencing for the rest of your life if you stick in the mental health profession. But it also is going to just promote practice for reading these kinds of articles. So, and I know that sounds like the same thing. I guess what I'm trying to say is that, like, on one hand, if you are interested in doing research, this will be a nice way to get those reps in, where you're kind of practicing reading those research articles, because doing that is not easy. It does not come naturally, and it requires practice. Even for me, somebody who loves that stuff, I know that it can be really boring, and finding the meaningful information in that is something that is a skill that takes practice. That's why we're doing it here. And also, it helps promote scientific literacy for whenever you're out in the real world and somebody tells you something, about the economy, or they tell you something about some health information, that you can maybe see through the jargon and look for the important stuff in that information. Other details here, if you require any kind of accommodations through the Bonacco Center, just let me know. I'm happy to work with you on those things. The makeup policy for this stuff is that if you are a day late, it's just 10% off of that assignment. But if you know that you're going to be absent for something, just let me know ahead of time, as early as you can, and we can probably work out a game plan around that. So if you miss 10 days, if it's 10 days late, then it's the highest grade you can get. The highest grade you can make is a 0. For some, the makeup policy is like, if you know that you might take the exam and bomb it because you didn't study for it, then maybe you take an extra day. The highest grade you can make is a 90, but that's going to be better than the 70 something or the 60 something or the 30 something that you would have made if you had not studied. In terms of plagiarism and stuff like that, zero tolerance and all that stuff. So, don't be silly. Don't be goofy about it. Just cite your references. Like, if you're writing something on the exam or in a discussion, just cite where you got that information. That's totally legit. That's what scientists all across the world do. We all borrow ideas and synthesize them in new ways and bring our own experience to explain stuff. And when we do, and I say we as a scientist, we cite it. We say, like, here's where I got this info. So it's totally okay if you do the same thing. Just don't do copy and paste, just word for word stuff, because that's lazy. But if you do plan on using AI, the way that I think about it is that using AI can be really awesome for studying. It is such a great tutor. It is such an awesome personalized tutor that helps me understand complex ideas and navigate problem solving and stuff like that. So it's a really great tool, but it's a great tool for studying. I don't think it's a good reason to not learn stuff. To be frank, I think some people use like ChatGPT to keep themselves stupid, Just to be honest with you, don't let it be that. Don't let it be an excuse to not learn something. So you can use it to help yourself. Don't use it to not learn. And sorry if that's mean or if that's rude, but actually, I'm not sorry. I'm. Don't forget office hours or meeting with me over Zoom. I would love to meet with you over Zoom because we're doing this online, and can be a bummer to not see each other face to face. That's always kind of fun to do. So let's meet over Zoom. Okay, so the first week is just going to cover chapter 1, and it's just going to be a discussion, and it's going to be that reflection activity that I mentioned earlier, and that's it. It's going to get faster after that, though, so be careful about that, because after that we're going to be covering multiple chapters a week because of our accelerated summer schedule. So just keep that in mind. I will open up some of those chapters early for those of you that like to work early, but other than that, I'm really excited for this semester, and I am excited to work with you. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you on Play-Doh. See you later. Bye bye.